everyone, my name's Ainsley and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, then welcome, and if you watched my first ever YouTube video from last week, then welcome back. I wanted to make a video. I was just thinking after last week, I talked a lot about how much I love reading and how all of my book purchases have been a problem in the past, so I thought it'd be fun to make a video on some of my favorite books. So here it is. To start off, these are in no particular order, so I just kind of grabbed them off my bookshelf, but the first one in the pile is the book that I talked about in my last video called The No Spend Year, How I Spent Less and Lived More. By Michelle McGaw, I think is how you pronounce it. This book I mentioned briefly last week in my previous video, that it's the inspiration behind my no buy year for 2020. This woman essentially just cuts out buying or spending money on anything that aren't absolute necessities. Not even just rent or groceries, but also cut out spending on a car. She walked and biked everywhere. No restaurants, no miscellaneous purchases, nothing. Just the bare necessities that she needed to pay. And yeah, it was really interesting to read kind of how she got through the year, and the different tricks that she used to kind of get what she needed, whether it was trading things or finding people that were giving away items, or I also found it really interesting the things that she did in terms of spending time with friends and family. I know spending money is a really big area of socializing, going out with friends. You go out to a restaurant or you go out for drinks, and so she could no longer do that, so she had to find different things that didn't involve spending money, but also still allowed her to spend quality time with friends. So that was a really interesting read for me, and I loved it. And of course, if you watched my last video, then you know that it inspired my one of my projects for the year 2020. That I have not gone to the extremes that she has by any means, but I cut out any purchases on things that I don't need in my life, or that I consider that I don't need. So yeah, it's a great read. I'd recommend it. Next on the list is #GirlBoss by Sophia Amoruso. She is the creator, founder, and I guess CEO, owner of the company Nasty Gal. And this book is really kind of a, what's the word? I want to say biography. It just kind of talks about the starting of her company, kind of a little bit of backstory about her life, how she grew up in not so great conditions, how she kind of created this company out of nothing. She kind of just figured out her talents and her skill set, and used those to her advantage, and really created this huge company out of a passion of hers, which was also really inspiring, that she didn't take a traditional route in life, that she figured out what she loved and she figured out how she could make a career out of it. So a very interesting read as well. I really enjoyed it, found it quite inspirational. It's always great to see kind of successful women and the way that they've kind of the path that they've taken in life. I find that really inspiring. So yeah, it's a really fun read. Next on the list is, I know it's on every girl's favorite book list, but the book called Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. This obviously is a poetry book, and it is the first book that really got me into reading poetry. Sounds terrible, but before I read this book, you kind of think of poetry as maybe a little bit of an older way of writing. When I thought of poetry, I would think of rhymes that we used to read in school, that sort of thing. And so this book really kind of just blew my mind, and just so inspiring that, you know, she talks about a lot of things that were a little, or kind of still are, I guess, a little more taboo, that not a lot of people write about. And she's so articulate and speaks so eloquently, but just, yeah, the vocabulary is just so rich, and just such powerful meanings behind each and every one of the poems. She clearly put a ton of time into it, and it was so enjoyable, so eye-opening, and that book really led me into reading many more poetry books. So yeah, I loved every page. Next on the list is a book that was based on a true story, called The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. So Jeanette Walls, the author, this is actually written about her childhood, based upon her life growing up and her relationship with her mom and her dad. I only read this, I want to say 1 or 2 years ago, but I feel like it's a classic. A lot of people have read it. It's won a billion awards, and for good reason. It is unlike anything that I've ever read before. The things that she went through as a child, and the very unique relationship she has with her mom and her dad, are so interesting to read about. Some aspects of it I found quite sad. Just a beautiful story overall. Her parents are very, I guess you would say, untraditional is a good word. Her mom and her dad did not work traditional careers. She moved around a lot, and just the way that their path that they chose to go through life, I found very interesting. And she has a way of writing these stories so beautifully. So, and the fact that it's a true story based off of her life, it was, yeah, just an incredible book. I would definitely recommend. The next book that I have in my pile is on every top 10 financial books list, but it is the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert T. Kiyosaki. Again, on every list of top 10 financial books, it's gonna be on the list. It is the book that really taught me about passive income. So it was very, very eye-opening for me. I've read it twice, and I'm not a book repeater normally. So I have found it very knowledgeable. I've learned a lot from the book. That book has led me to read many other financial books. Finance is definitely an area that I'm very interested in, I'm very passionate about. And so yeah, it really just kind of got me thinking differently about money. So I would definitely recommend. Again, the author kind of writes about his experience growing up as a child, talks about rich dad referring to his friend's father and poor dad referring to his own father. Both kind of took very different paths with their career, both very successful men in their own ways, but totally different decision making money wise. And he kind of talks about those differences in what he has learned from those two men, and kind of how he's developed into the businessman that he is today based off of what he learned as a kid, which I thought was really cool because I don't know about other schools, but I know my school specifically, finances were not taught in the curriculum at all. Especially in math class, which is really frustrating because as an adult, you start having to do all of these normal adult tasks like paying your taxes, let's say, and I had no idea how to pay my taxes. I had memorized a billion different calculus formulas, but I didn't know how to pay my taxes, and I didn't know how to invest my money, and all of these really important things that we should be teaching children and young adults and adults once they've graduated. This is such an important part of life, financial literacy, and it's not taught at all. So I found that book super helpful. So that's why it's on this list. And the next book on the list, one of my all-time favorites, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. So this book I think is amazing. Just all about mindset in life. Just different ways of thinking, which after reading it, I just found it so helpful in kind of analyzing your thought process when you're going through a hard time in life or when a problem arises. How you deal with that in your head can make a world of difference. If you're having a bad day, it's all about how you analyze the situation and how you react. So it's really, just a great book. I think everyone should read it, no matter what career field you're in, no matter what you're interested in. It's relevant for everyone, no matter what your situation is. So it's a great book. Definitely recommend. The next book is one of the most recent ones that I've read. It's called Evicted by Matthew Desmond. It's a fairly new book. I want to say it came out in 2017. I could be wrong, but it's fairly new. And this book is, I was at a loss for words when I read this book. It is so eye-opening. Called Evicted, the author, Matthew Desmond, wrote this book based off of people that he met. It's all about poverty in America, in different communities, and he writes it from all different perspectives of poverty. He writes it in the perspective of, or writes it about people who are currently in poverty, families, single individuals, parents in poverty, writes about how it affects their lives and the struggles that they encounter on an every single day basis. But he also writes it from other perspectives, the people who are not living in poverty themselves but deal with people that are living in poverty, such as landlords and businessmen, specifically trailer park owners, just people that they themselves are not low income, but they are they interact regularly with people that are low income. And this book made me want to write a book. The stories that this author tells, it's completely non-fictional. The author actually writes about these people that he knows personally. And the way that he tells these individual stories is amazing, and it's so heartbreaking to read these stories, because poverty is something that I think everyone knows what poverty is, but definitely not everyone has experienced poverty. I myself have not. So it's really different to know what something is, but to not truly understand how it affects people. Not necessarily just even homeless individuals. Most of these individuals in the story that he talks about have a home at certain parts in the book, but talks about the struggles, specifically getting evicted from their different homes and how that affects their lives. A lot of the people in the story have children, which is also heartbreaking to read about, but such a powerful story, and really gives you a different perspective and really makes you count your blessings and realize how lucky that you are. It's very easy in this day, I feel like, to forget how privileged some people are. I myself, I have countless privilege in life that you don't always realize, and I feel like it's very easy to focus on things in life, focus on the things that you don't have or that you want, and it's very easy to forget to be grateful for what you do have. So that book really hit home for me in just kind of reminding me to really appreciate the things that I have, be grateful for what I have, and the privileges that I have in life. So yeah, again, an amazing book. I cannot recommend it enough. The next book on the list is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I hope I'm saying that right. Probably not. But this is an older book, I believe. When was this written? It says copyright 1988. So I guess depending on your perspective, it is an older book. I thought it was older for some reason, but 1988. The Alchemist. It is a classic about this shepherd and his quest for riches in life, and it talks about kind of the lessons that he learns along the way. Just a very interesting book. It's hard to talk about these books without totally giving away. I don't want to give away the plot or the main storyline. So it's hard to give details about the books without totally just kind of spoiling them. But yeah, an amazing book, very, very interesting. So I would definitely recommend. The next book on the list, I believe this is the most recent book out of all of these that I've read, called The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. This is a fiction book, and it is unlike any other book that I've read. I heard about it, I think I was watching someone else's YouTube video online. Oh, darn, I can't remember who it was, but this book was on their list. And essentially it's about these 4 siblings that, when they're children, they go see this kind of like this fortune teller or psychic, and she tells all four children the date that they're going to die, which is a little bit morbid, but then the book talks about afterwards the way that these four very, very different children, the way that these children choose to live their lives based on knowing, or potentially, they don't know if it's actually true or not, but potentially knowing the day that their life is going to end. And it talks about how knowing that affects their decisions. All four siblings are very, very different. I really enjoyed two of the characters. Two I had a harder time relating to, but just a super interesting concept, a really good read for anyone that enjoys fiction novels. And yeah, it's a great book. I just recently read it. I don't actually own it. I took it out from the library, so I got it back from the library just to make this video. But yeah, it's a great book. The last book on this list, number 10, is a little bit different than the other ones, but it is called The Shell Collector by Anthony Doerr. I'm definitely mispronouncing that. I apologize, but this book is actually a collection of short stories. It's not like a traditional novel. So it's a bunch of little mini stories that are collected together. And I didn't really have much history with reading short stories before. And the short stories in this book, I loved them all equally. I can't even pick out, you know, sometimes you're like, oh, I liked these parts, but I didn't like these parts. And you know, you're like, oh, some chapters are really hard to get through, but other chapters were good. The entire book from first page to last is so beautifully written. The short stories, they are all so different, and yet each story is just I feel like I've said this word 100 times, but so eye-opening. They all kind of talk about different lessons in life, which I found really interesting. And this book, I've been meaning to read this author's other books. I know that he's got quite a few other books that have won many, many awards. So I'm looking forward to reading some of his other work. But yeah, I think if I had to pick a all-time favorite book, just one, I think it would be this one. It's so good. I cannot recommend this enough. So that is it. Those are currently my top 10 favorite novels. I'm sure as I read more books, I'll have more to add to the list. There's many, many other books that I love. These are just the favorites that I could think of right now. So as I mentioned in my last video, reading is a huge passion of mine. Every year I make it a goal to read at least one book a month. I was really, really big into reading as a kid, and then university came and I had to read so much for school that outside of school, I feel like my mind was just kind of burnt out and I didn't want to do any sort of reading. So after I graduated, I got really back into reading. So I normally will at least read one book a month. So yeah, that is it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye.